Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah, welcome to another chat with your boy Zachy. This is the boy, the chosen one. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? We like we promised, you know what I'm saying? We're gonna link up a little bit more and do streams a little bit more during the day. You know, it's beautiful outside, you know, alhamdulillah. So, you know, I think the weather outside kind of is inspirational, you know what I'm saying?
Beautiful, yeah. Mashallah.
Mashallah. Yeah, so this one is going to be a little bit something that I kind of talked about on my channel when I first started off. But, you know, it's a good thing to kind of like jump back and start reflecting on because I think that there's no honest conversations, even within Muslim YouTube, about the scholarship. And I feel like more than any other group in the Ummah, the Ulemma, unfortunately, historically especially, has not been challenged in a long period of time. And I think that's really important.
Say that again, man. We had a lot of interference in the background.
Yeah, I said basically, I think the one group in the Ummah that doesn't get challenged a lot is the Ulemma.
Yes.
People challenge politicians, people challenge sultans, but one group of people that, you know, they kind of don't get challenged, the ulama. And we know that the deen and the ummah is actually very diverse, of different races. I don't want to say sects, but there's different schools of Islam. You know what I'm saying? Hanafi, Maliki, you know, they got the Shias, you got the Sufis, you got Salafis. You got all different kinds of people and how they interpret, you know what I'm saying, the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's not recognized, unfortunately. And so I have some personal I don't want to say grievances, but I got problems with how the ulama has operated historically, and I feel like it's been really inconsistent, and it also acts like it's incorruptible.
Yeah.
See, only the prophets, Rasulullah, were like incorruptible. You know, all the prophets, including, you know, Ibrahim and all that. But the ulama are historically have made fatwas that are very politically motivated. They're inconsistent with, especially calls for jihad. For instance, if you want to look at the calls for jihad, nobody's saying anything about the Uyghurs and the ulama. You know what I'm saying? Nobody's saying anything about what's going on in China, but they want to go out of their way to talk about Palestine and Afghanistan and all these other countries to support conflicts there, but they have no support for their Uyghur brothers because the Chinese Communist Party has their hands in their pockets, you know? And that's really, really kind of disappointing. I mean, if you look at the Saudis, right? The Saudis like to brand themselves out as being, you know, the home place of Islam and stuff like that, but they've done a lot of things historically that let down the Ummah. In fact, especially siding with the British to fight the Ottoman Empire, which was the last caliph. But I won't get into that. We're basically going to just more harp on, you know, the ulama, and not from specific events, but just, you know, in general, because I think that would take a lot of time to go this fatwa, this one. So I'm gonna go through what I know now personally, and then move on. And what's up, Nicer? Nice to see you again. I'm sorry this topic may go over your head. I know you're not Muslim, but I think you can kind of learn about, you know, Muslim history and philosophy kind of from this discussion. So, brother, you want to take the floor?
Oh, definitely, man. I'm pretty much going to do the same today. Just as an introduction, it's the chosen one, it's the guided one, it's the guided one, it's the chosen one, it's the man with the pitcher of water. I just want to say that the issue that we see with today's ulama, the people that call themselves scholars, is credentialing. Credentialing and convenience. Whether that's political gain, or whether that's for spiritual or religious recognition, or whether it's just for outright deterrence and deceit. And what I've noticed today is that nobody, right? There's certain things that no one is talking about on the pulpits, especially for like Jummah, right? Dajjal is one of them, but also we're not talking about the signs of the end times, and a lot of those signs are the ones who are telling us, or come from the ones that are telling us what those signs are. You know, they're telling us about all these hadiths. They're telling us about all this history, when really they're not actually teaching us true deen. And what I've noticed is, like, the Prophet ﷺ told us that the end times, people would be there would be so much knowledge, there's so many books, but people would still be illiterate. But what does that mean? What we see nowadays that, people, not only are people too lazy, but the internet and then technology has become a huge thing also. But there's also a huge, it's a tactic that was done by the principalities in place where they pretty much flood the system. They flood society. They flood the matrix with so much information that it becomes diluted because there's too much. You can't filter what synchronizes with reality. And I feel like a lot of the Ulemma have done that also. A lot of the scholars, what we call the scholars, And a lot of days people think I know a lot of Muslim brothers who they go off on journeys and kind of like nomadic journeys where they go to different parts of like the Middle East or parts of the world where they go and learn from certain people who, at the end of the day, they just learned something that was passed down traditionally, whether or not they know it was true or not. You know what I mean? So many things have been filtered through, and like you said earlier, they become fatwas. But how do we know that wasn't for political gain because somebody was jealous or somebody wanted power or because somebody was after somebody and made it a law not to do something that somebody did? You know what I mean? I just think at the end of the day, the Prophet ﷺ told us that there'd be so many different sects of Islam towards the end times, and a true believer is one that doesn't follow them. You're a Muslim. You're not Sunni, you're not Shia, you're not all these other things. This is the language that the Prophet ﷺ didn't even have in his vocabulary. So why are we using these to dictate how much knowledge and what the legitimacy of that knowledge is? You know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense. Why don't we look at what's tangible within the religion? Why don't we look at what's clear, concise? And then, I ran into a brother recently I went to high school with. I'm not going to name any names, but he approached me because of how I presented myself in my content and on my videos and what I was talking about. And he kept telling me how science is not a means to look at the deen, look at the religion. And I find that pretty stupid because if you look all over the Quran, that's what it is. I like to use astrology, for example. A lot of people say, a lot of Muslims say, a lot of the Ulemma say that astrology is haram. If you look all over the world, I mean, even the wise men who came from where? Persia, right? Somewhere out there, right? The three wise men in the story of Jesus, they came from Persia. How did they come? They followed the stars, and it guided them to Bethlehem or wherever he was born. You look at the word alchemy, which is the study of the chemical structure of things, and the breakdown of the physical and the spiritual. You know what I mean? And that's an Arabic term. It's an Arabic word, alchemy. And you take just take the AL and put it at the end of the word. You have chemical, right? And so you look at these things like, oh, these are haram. These are all these. There's a story, and Allahu Alam, I forget where it's from. There's a story of the Prophet ﷺ when he was consulting the jinn had come to him because they were worried that the humans were defecating on their food source, which is like bones and things that were found in the wilderness and everything, right? And so they came to him to consult him about it. So the man that the Prophet ﷺ was standing with actually told the man to grab some salt, draw a circle around him with the salt, and don't come out until he's done consulting the jinn. And what he was doing was alchemy, because salt has properties that actually help in terms of the electromagnetic energy that the jinns are technically made of, right? It actually helped to protect this man. And we've seen examples of this, that people who are in, let's say, like a natural disaster, they've previously put salt on their windows or around their house, and every other building has fallen except their house. And people are wondering, oh, how did it happen? Well, they were protected from the natural, the natural world, because of these properties. These is what we call metaphysics, which is the link between the physical and the spiritual. But see, we get so lost in what other people have said, about these hadiths. For example, like I have a gold pendant here. They always say, oh, it's haram for men to wear gold, never explaining it. And then when all of the Islamic golden age was when Africans ruled it, and Africans had nothing but gold. I mean, look at ancient Egypt. So how do you strip a people, you Arabs, how do you strip a people of everything they've ever had, and then tell them, when they were building buildings out of gold, you tell them, oh, you can't wear it now, But you can, like you said earlier, they use it as a currency. That makes no sense.
Yeah,
and it's because it was a fatwa created to keep these specific people down. You know what I mean? When you study history, certain things just don't add up. And I'm sorry, a lot of the Arabs that call themselves Arabs are not true Arabs. Because you got to realize, Prophet ﷺ in his time was closer to a black Arab than what you Arabs are today, with the light skins, big noses, and the green eyes. Astaghfirullah. Astaghfirullah. You can't keep saying these things and thinking you can get away with it, and then you're teaching the Ulemma generation after generation, or the Ummah generation after generation about these things, and they're just lies and false flags, to fit a narrative.
Yeah, good points, man. And so going back to the Sahaba and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sorry, excuse me. One thing I think that was always troubling is the biggest argument that a lot of atheists or ex-Muslims, Christians, whatever like that make against Islam, a lot of the information is provided via hadith, right? And especially the one by Sheikh Al-Bukhari. And there was a video by David Wood that he made. Basically, it was basically a refutal against Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali, bless his soul, he passed away shortly before that video came out, and he was basically how Muhammad Ali, changed his name to Muhammad based upon the Prophet Sallallahu. Yeah, sorry, sometimes messing me up. My Arabic is terrible. And how the Prophet Muhammad had slaves, and some of those slaves were African, and this, that, and the third. And he also went into the race or the description of the Prophet as being like a pale-skinned guy with red hair and stuff. And to me, that makes absolutely no sense.
It couldn't
people of that region, because even like, let's say Isa, what I'm saying, or how he's known as Jesus, right? He freaking was described in the Bible as, even in the King James version, as being with hair like wool, right, and his feet look like bronze.
Right.
So Arabia is further away from that, further away from the Mediterranean, which is where the white people at the time were, the Greeks, the Romans, and stuff like that. So how would a guy, how would a guy that lives in that region, he's further south from, ancient Palestine, where, or ancient Israel, where, Jesus lived, how is that guy freaking pale skin with red hair? That doesn't make any freaking sense.
Especially when tracking lineage.
Yeah. So, but that's in the hadith, right? And then people use that also to justify, I know some brothers actually that probably would revert to Islam if it wasn't for like hadiths like that basically paint a picture of like, he was a white guy and, he owned black people and this, that, and the third, never minding that he went to East Africa and he fit perfectly in with the culture. He had black wives and things like that.
Yes.
So, and that's just, it's just insane. But one hadith that I'm really going to go on, and this is a big debate that the Ulemma really struggles with now, and it's about music. And I kind of, over time, I've shifted my opinions back and forth over time. It's really confusing because the biggest argument for that has been hadith, right? Solely on hadith. Hadith really isn't mentioned in the Quran. It's, but it's mentioned in hadiths. In particular, there was a line that was done by the Prophet, peace be upon him, about there's going to be a time where men are going to think, drinking alcohol, wearing silk, and listening to music is going to be, or making music. I don't know if it was listening or making music is going to be considered halal. But at the same time, there's hadiths of where he was in East Africa enjoying festivities by the locals, and those locals played very, African culture, they play really heavy drums, right? And also the people at the time, too, in East Africa, they didn't dress like how the Arabs at the time dressed. They were more looser clothing. Women wore more looser clothing and stuff like that, as far as, more skin would be showing and stuff like that. Then later, East Africa, Ethiopia, for instance, and Somalia, they got more introduced to, monotheism. So over time, they changed away from their pagan ways. But he never dissed them or criticized their culture or anything like that. Right. And he married those people, right? Also people from so how can music be haram per se based upon that if he clearly enjoyed himself, right, during these festivities? And it just makes, I think that argument is really based upon one thing, because some of these same people will go enjoy Bollywood movies and things like that, the sheets and stuff like that. I think a lot of it comes from and I don't want to say that racism is the main source, but I think a lot of it comes from ignorance of racism, because African people, music has been a very important way of how we communicate with each other, and storytelling and stuff like that. And then that was not native of their culture, of like the Arab culture at the time, so they look upon it as being foreign. And if you actually look at like the more Salafi or the more Wahhabi a person is, the more they put Arab culture as being sacrosanct, right? And it's like Islam was not made to be Arabic culture expanding all over the place, right? And then there's a lot of, there's a lot of people, including my father, who one of the main reasons that they probably will never revert to Islam is because they view it as the religion of the Arabs. But the Prophet, peace be upon him, came for all people.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes, you can find Islam. I have Nigerian roots when I found out my ancestry. So I did a little bit of research. Islam, look, the Prophet ﷺ, peace be upon him, and his soul, may Allah, grant him the highest level of Jannah for those. But the Prophet ﷺ passed away in close to mid 6th century, right? You can find Islam in places like Nigeria as early as the 7th century.
Yeah.
So that's not even a century. You know what I mean? That's maybe several decades after his passing. Yeah. You can find Islam in Africa. How is that possible? You know what I mean? But it's not being taught that way. It's always Arab. You guys are like the Christians. It's like Jesus. But instead, you guys using the Arabs. I like to focus on the Mahdi too, because I did a lot of research on Musa, Isa, and the Mahdi. Musa was Egyptian, an ancient Egyptian, not today's Egyptian, an ancient Egyptian. So if he grew up under Pharaoh, right, the pharaohs that conquered his land, yes, and his people were enslaved in their own land, because we got to remember, they weren't taken from land and brought to Egypt. They were enslaved in their land, right? So that means that these conquerors, which were just modern-day Europeans, right? These conquerors had actually came in and pretended to be pharaohs, just like they're doing today with African tribes. You can actually see pictures of chiefs that are completely blonde-haired, blue-eyed guys, old men that are in there to just have their own agenda, pretty much. And when you look at how Musa came to save the children of Israel, right? And Jesus came. He makes the claim in the Bible. He says he came for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He came to fulfill the law, not to change it. Yep. Right? So if he came to fulfill the laws of Moses, the laws of Moses came from his Egyptian background. And when Jesus comes back, the second coming, Christians, Muslims, the second coming of Christ, he's going to be shooting out Egyptian principles, ancient Egyptian knowledge, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm not trying to put like a Egyptian connotation on it, but it's a lot of knowledge that was studied in those areas of the world. And then you look at the Mahdi, right? The Mahdi, they say, is from the lineage of Fatima. Fatima's mother was Khadija. Khadija is known to be African, of African descent. So the Mahdi is going to have to be an African Arab or something close to that, a black man. He's not going to be some a slick-haired, green-eyed, big-nosed Arab. And I'm not racist here, but you gotta look at the facts here.
Yeah, this guy loves Arabs.
Yeah, I married an Arab, so I know what I'm talking about. You know what I mean? And you just have to trace lineage and history. And the history books, it'll show you that the history books have been lying to you. A lot of your scholars have been lying to you. You know what I mean? And so it's crazy because it's funny because Yasir Qadhi he's a great speaker. And Mufti May, all these people, they'll quote from Bukhari, right? Yeah. But then they'll disagree with Bukhari on the fact that all the prophets were black. He has a video where he talks about Omar Suleiman says it too. He's another speaker. He says all the prophets were black. Musa was black. Jesus, Isa was black. Isa is described as black. Jesus is described as black in the Quran. I mean, in the Bible. Excuse me. Yeah. You know what I mean? Copper skin with hair like wool. Yeah. Bronze feet with eyes like fire. You know what I mean? And then we don't see these things actually being taught. You know what I'm saying? In the modern hadith, and that's what I mean by like the Ulemma, the modern day scholars are teaching us things that don't make any sense. The true children of Israel are really just the melanated people. I don't hear Arabs mention it. I don't, even though they hate the Jews, they don't mention that because they're racist. They don't mention the other side of who the real Jews are, which are black people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, and I really like the topic of the Mahdi because the Mahdi has to be a black man. He's going to be a black man. And it's funny because even in the ancient, not the ancient, even one of the hadiths is that an Ethiopian king, this is what they said, an Ethiopian king will destroy the Kaaba at the end time. It's a hadith from the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
Wow.
Yeah. So what kind of shift is going to happen towards the end times? And this is when all people are like, all religion has left and Allah lifts the Quran from the earth. That's a hadith also. But, and I don't mean lift it, but I think people aren't going to be able to understand it anymore. They're not going to have the knowledge. That's what it means.
I feel you.
So like, there's just so many things that you got to add up in your head and realize, just study the history of stuff, And it's really just looking at lineage, looking at and doing basic research. You know what I mean? And it's not always what somebody says or some story that was passed down.
Yeah.
Especially these people who have limited perspectives too, because they grew up in Pakistan or Turkey or wherever they came from. You know what I mean? These people aren't actually qualified. We need to start looking at people's qualifications to see what they're talking about.
Yeah. So that's why I also put in the title, what qualifies somebody to be considered a scholar, in your opinion?
Me?
Yeah.
Someone who rationalizes reality. I don't think because you can be well traveled, you can be a Bill Nye, but that doesn't mean you know true science. A true science, for example, is a tangible study, right?
Yeah.
And I'm using science as an example because it's the most misconstrued topic in terms of how we perceive it through the filter of religion.
Facts.
And I feel like a lot of scholars, Muslim scholars, they don't actually want people to know, because I think today's Islam is not the same Islam that came with the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Because his Islam was to teach that the knowledge that came from Allah was the knowledge that all other prophets had. It's just been corrupted over time. And a lot of today's scholars aren't studying what that knowledge is. They're just going based off of today's discoveries.
Yeah, I think that's really a big thing. And there's a lot of elitism, I think, also in the Ulemma, just like anywhere else. I mean, there's elitism in politics, music, just everything that human beings get into, there's always a hierarchy, right? But I think when people, like for instance, there's, in order to study, you have to be sponsored and go to a university and stuff. It's just like, regular secular, school you have to go to for biology, you have to go to a certain school, engineering, art, all that stuff. But within those confines of the academia, there's so much elitism, and you can't question certain things. Like as I get older,
its own church.
Yeah, you know what I mean? As I get older, man, I'm beginning to realize that like so-called academia is really flawed. Like I learned Albert Einstein wasn't the big genius that he was put out to be, and a lot of these people that come up with these concepts that everybody lauds for when these incredible geniuses.
Notice they have Jewish names. I'm sorry to interrupt. But
yeah.
Go ahead.
And so these people are put on a pedestal. And, nobody really goes out there with a question these people's motives, their intentions, this, that, and the third.
Exactly.
And so, for instance, there was a fatwa that was done during the Ottoman Empire. I'm not sure what sultan was in power at the time, but the sultan pressured the ulama to make chess was haram because people would get in fights trading chess and stuff like that, which is stupid. I played in chess club. I never really came to that. Yeah, you get butthurt if you lose, but that's pretty much it, right? But they had a fatwa to make that haram. And they also made a fatwa making coffee of all things haram. And if you know anything about people in that region, they freaking love coffee. But the reason they did that was because there was a trade war going on. Or, for coffee production. And that's just insane, you know what I'm saying? Like, for real, like, why would you say coffee of all things is haram just for political or economic gain and stuff? It has nothing to do with the religion or how it affects people, this, that, and the third. And it's just, because those people are in positions like that where they get the politicians hand in hand with them, they can make rulings like that are just stupid, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think most of the time that's literally what it is, because as you notice, there's just like hush culture when it comes to like social media and technology. I mean, look at YouTube. Anybody that talks about the truth, they're usually fact checked. You know what I mean? And it's funny because they'll fact check people without actually providing the facts. It's so trippy, but nobody questions that. They just assume that, he's been fact checked. Oh, that must mean he's not telling the truth. You know what I mean? And it's not actually analyzing what he says. You know what I mean? And that's funny to me, because some of these people who aren't being fact checked and just allowed to have such a big, huge, how can you say, following. You know, they're never questioned. You know, people just accept it, and they're kind of doing what the Christian church does, which is play on people's feelings in terms of how the religion should. And that's what a lot of the modern day speakers are, like Naman Ali Khan. Who else? Mufti Mank. You got who else? Yasir Qadhi, Omar Suleiman. These are some of the mainstream guys that, just to name a few, that aren't actually, they're practicing what I like to call today Orthodox Islam. Their version of Orthodox Islam. And so you asked me that question earlier. I just want to kind of continue off of that. I think what qualifies somebody to be a scholar is the fact that they don't call themselves a scholar.
Yeah, man, that's for real, and all that stuff could be easily swayed, and it's kind of crazy how it gets like that, to where, like, for instance, when you're young and you start questioning things, it's healthy, right? That's just a part of life. You start questioning reality, start questioning the social norms that you live under, and eventually you question what your parents taught you, and that was a problem that kind of led me away from like Christianity. It was just like I had a lot of questions. I was like, hey, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. Blah blah blah. And I couldn't get an answer that was solid.
Don't ask questions.
Yeah. People will do that, and unfortunately, that happens in the Ummah too. I know a lot of people, especially like, they don't feel spiritually connected to Islam.
Not at all.
It's just like, chores. It's like, I make salah, I offer salah because it's that time of day. My parents, they really want me to do it, and I really don't feel like doing it. But, and I feel like that's the difference between reverts and people that are born Muslim. And I'm going to be honest, we have an advantage over them because we made a choice out of this. We weren't just raised in a Muslim family.
Right. So it's not as mundane.
It's not as mundane. We don't look at it that way. We look at it upon it as like, this is an actual connection that we're having with purpose, as opposed to, I just grew up in Pakistan, or I just grew up in Afghanistan, I just grew up in East Africa, and this is how people do things. So it's not special, right? And that's the thing, is like unfortunately, those kids are also not taught in a practical way about their deen. And I also saw
I like that word, practical.
Yeah, I also saw like a video from a Somali brother talking about how kids get disconnected because they're forced to, recite Quran and memorize it and stuff like that. And that's so important, especially to a lot of the Salafis, more really Orthodox people. That's so important to them. But they're not talking about explaining the verses to the kids, or when it was revealed, the importance of reciting Quran and memorizing and stuff like that. And when that happens, bro, I mean, who cares if your kid can recite the Quran if he doesn't believe it?
Right, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. And I've seen that they do that to the kids, and it's just like, he can recite the Quran. Oh, congratulations. Does he know what any of it means? No. They're like 3-4 years old. He can recite Quran. And it's just like, well, yeah, it's like what people do in college. They just memorize a bunch of crap, throw it on the test, and call themselves having a degree. You know what I mean? And they're not actually using their own discernment. They don't use their own faculties to actually understand what they're saying. I like to also use the example of the night journey that the Prophet ﷺ took from one masjid to the next masjid, and on his journey, and then to the heavens. How else would you explain that? Did he travel by goat or car or jet in those times? How would you explain that unless you understood what astral projection is? What's astral projection? Or what's spirituality? What's metaphysics? You know, what are these things? But a lot of people, that's too fantasy. That's too far fetched. You know what I mean? And it's just like, it's so crazy to me that I'm not going to say I'm expert. I don't toot my own horn, but I'm pretty knowledgeable when it comes to the metaphysics, because that is the link between these so-called unexplainable things that even these children, like you were explaining, if they were to ask their parents can't tell them. They'll just say, oh, that's what we do. That's the thing. That's our culture. You know what I mean? Just follow and don't ask questions.
Yeah, and sorry guys, I know it's rude to be on your phone and stuff like that, but there's what's it called? YouTube. There was a really good video on YouTube kind of explaining this, and there was another video on YouTube, and it was about the rapper Prodigy. So the rapper Prodigy from Mobb Deep, he did a solo album before he died. He was talking about the Illuminati, and I can't, it's crazy. I can't find that video anymore, and it was so good. It was one of the last interviews he did, man, and it's kind of crazy, man, that, that they would do that and take it away, because it was very easy to find, you know what I'm saying? And yeah, I'll look for it later, man. Wait till this stream is over. But one of the ones we wanted to collaborate on is talking about stuff like the Illuminati and music and things like that. Oh, yeah.
I had something about music. But go ahead, finish your thought, brother.
Yeah, so I think the Ulemma, and this is one thing. So I don't like to label myself, for instance, but one of the reasons I lean towards Sufism is there isn't this obsession with the hierarchy and this, that, and the third. And yeah, they may have certain different groups of Sufis may do things that I don't agree with, like, for instance, praying at graves and all that kind of stuff. And that's something I obviously don't agree with. But I think one of the reasons the Ulemma don't like them is because a lot of these people are free spirits, and they rationalize their spiritual connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when people do that, they naturally lean away from like the hierarchy and the kind of social framework of what was like, traditional, you know what I'm saying? And okay, Nicer says, you're not on the phone, you're using the phone to look up subject matter related. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Yeah, I'm not like, especially a lot of girls, they used to be on the phone, just being on the phone, just to be on the phone. You know what I'm saying? But that's a whole other subject. I don't want to get off topic, but yeah, like, and I think that's why we suffer from disunity in the Ummah, is because nobody's really focused on that. It's just basically there's white supremacy is, obviously out there, but there's a sense of like a lot of the Ulemma, all it is just Arab supremacy. There's an inferiority complex I think other races and other groups have towards Arabs as being like the forefathers and blah 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 blah. Kind of like how Christians do with Jews. It's like, oh, well, they're the forefathers and blah blah blah.
Most of the Arabs that we call Arabs today are really just conquered peoples. They're the modern day Europeans, or back in those times, you would call them like basically the Europeans, which were people who were conquered. Look at the Persians. They're basically Arabs who they're a more indigenous, or they came from a more indigenous peoples who were filtered through the white race. You know what I mean? That's basically who they were.
And don't take this as being us being like we're bashing white people or anything. Not at all. This is just history.
History of genetics.
Yeah, history of genetics. And that's the way it's like. Just like if you see somebody up like that's Western Hispanic, from the Western Hemisphere, whether they identify as Latino or whatever like that. I'm not going to get into that, but let's say they live in, Argentina, Brazil, all those countries, Mexico, they were colonized by the Spanish. So yes, some of them have indigenous blood, but some more than others, especially, in the skin complexion, obviously they're not as indigenous as, the people that lived before the colonization period happened, So,
yeah, and I find that very unique. You mentioned music, man. There's a really good video online, and you can type it in. I usually put in Quran and music. You can type it in on YouTube. And there's a video of a brother. He's playing some beats on a music streaming, a music creating tool, like one of those apps, right?
Yeah.
And he's playing some music, and he's actually recorded his friend doing the reciting the Quran. And he shows how the Quran was actually being recited in 432 hertz. It's a measurement of frequency. And 432 hertz is also considered an earth tone, healing tone, right? But the way he was reciting it, it actually matched that frequency tone. And then he played like African music and rock music after that, and he showed how it was all over the place because of the way it was made and the hertz in which it was being played through. You know what I mean? So that's also frequency and technology and all these other things that people think, oh, that's wrong, that's science. Oh, no, he's talking about science. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But the recitation of the Quran was measured as a healing tone. Yeah. That's what we say. The Quran that's what it's for. It's to heal you spiritually. Yeah. You know what I mean? And it's just like, well, no, that's just conjecture. And it's like, no, man, these are real things. You know, you just got to look into them with the right perspective. You know what I mean?
You know what trips me? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. You're good.
You know, what trips me out, too, is these same people want to have their cake and eat it too. Yeah. Like, for instance, right, there was a lot of people believe that musical instruments are haram, but the sheets aren't, right? And I was like, okay, fair enough. And I was like, did you know there's an album by an artist named Bjork? She's, of course, Muslim, but she's a very popular music recording artist. She's from Iceland. She does like trip hop and stuff, alternative music. She has an album, and the whole album is literally without any musical instruments. It's just effects and it's a cappella. And so she mixes the voices together to make beats or, harmonizing and stuff like that. And they were like, they kind of really didn't know what to say. They were like, oh, well, it's just haram. I'm like, well, why? Just it literally fits the criteria of what you want. And I also thought about this too. Why is beatboxing haram? People are like, oh, well, it's imitating a musical instrument. I'm like, beatboxing probably existed before anything. It's probably one of the first forms of communication, right? Or so-called music. And I was like, it's a nasheed, essentially, but you don't like it. Why? Because it's associated with black people and hip-hop,
right? To
be honest.
Right, and I think here's something I'm going to put into perspective. It's like this, right? People say, oh, it's like when you these are the fatwas that they created. It's like when you say, oh, guns are bad. No, they're not. The people who use them are bad. That's like, imagine if they said in the Prophet Sallallahu time, Astaghfirullah, oh, swords are bad.
Yeah.
Swords are haram.
Or fire's bad.
Yeah, right.
Because it burns things.
Right, exactly. That's ridiculous. So when you look at, what was I going to say? I was going to talk about, I used to go to school for music, actually. I only went for a couple of months, but I actually stopped going. I learned that music was haram, right? So I stopped going. And because of how I perceived it, when you're actually creating music, you're actually twisting. If it's not natural, right? You're actually twisting and thwarting Allah's creation, which is sound, frequency, and vibration. And if you go on my Instagram, I have a video of this metal plate. It's hooked up with wires, right, to a frequency toner, right? So I'm gonna use this as an example. So this is the metal plate, and it's hooked up to a frequency toner, right? And as you change the frequency, right, he pours salt on the plate. As you change the frequency, the salt starts to form geometric shapes, and this is what they call sacred geometry, which is the study of frequency, vibration, and all these sciences, right? And you put it all over, you Muslims, you put it all over your Qurans, all over the masjids, because we knew. See, you can't. A lot of people can't tell you this. A lot of Muslims can't tell you this, but the ancients knew. Our ancient Muslims knew what this stuff was, and that's why they put it all over the architecture. Look at Spain. And I've been there. I've seen some of the architecture. It's beautiful, but it all has sacred geometry all over. And sacred geometry is literally just being able to observe different levels of frequency that create certain vibrational aspects of matter. That's all it is. But if you don't study metaphysics and science, you're gonna be like, oh, this guy's talking hocus pocus. You guys don't. The scholars of today won't teach you that. I don't know if Mufti Menk will talk about that, but I'm sure he'll talk about cell phones are haram. However, you know what I mean? Like just mundane things that don't really matter. As he pulls one out and talks, and to record his YouTube videos. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying he does that, of course, but it's just an example. So it's really important that we really distinguish and use our own discernment and not just follow what these people say. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying these are only scholars too. There are some scholars out there that are very knowledgeable, and it's just you have to take everything people say with a grain of salt. I'm not saying everything they talk about is wrong, but you have to, because if not, you have to be able to weigh it against reality, and that's why I started saying that. It's really dangerous.
Yeah.
So like I said, all that frequency stuff, those are sounds, those are vibrations. That's what music is. But you can use it in a haram way. That's why they say it's haram, because most of it, if you look at the music industry, it's created and it's obviously, you can just listen to the sounds of it. It's obviously geared towards messing with your psychological, and your physiological body. You know what I mean? You ever put a bass underwater or on some sand or whatever? The bass will mess with the sand. It's the same concept as the frequency toner and the salt, right? So imagine what it's doing to the minerals in your body and the water in your body, and your blood, And it depends on how you're using those frequencies to level yourself.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt again, man, but when I get thoughts, I have to put it out before I forget. So another thing that Illinois likes to do is they're inconsistent. So they'll be like, oh, music is haram, right? And then, or, TV and movies obviously incorporates haram things, like, what I'm saying, like, in their eyes, like music. And then if you're playing a movie where it's historically accurate, obviously the woman probably are not going to dress modestly, depending on what time period it is and stuff.
Right.
But they'll accept it when it furthers their agenda. For instance, like Urtugul. Urtugul is a really good show, and it makes Islam look really good as being, the founders of the Ottoman Empire, this, that, and the third, right? And obviously those actors weren't married together. So when like a guy that's not married to a woman, he kisses a woman or he holds her and stuff like that, obviously that will be looked upon as being haram, right? But they have to be accurate to the story. You know what I'm saying? And they won't. It has music in the show too, but they won't say anything about it, right. Because it makes Islam look good, and it furthers their agenda. They also won't. Also, like other, different industries. For instance, MMA. We all know that Khabib is looked upon as being a hero. He's like the new Muhammad Ali. You know what I'm saying? He's really pro-Muslim. A lot of good role model and stuff. However, UFC fights are also haram because they have like ring girls and they serve alcohol there and all this kind of scantily clad woman there and stuff like that. And some brothers also are even trying to argue that MMA in of itself is haram. But I'm like, bro, how are our brothers supposed to be raised as warriors and expected to defend the Ummah and they don't know how to fight? Right. Like, that makes no freaking sense whatsoever. So you're going to have a bunch of beta male freaking Muslim guys, if it actually comes down to it, they were taught that learning MMA and how to fight is considered bad. Right. So how are you expected to defend themselves? Like, that kind of logically doesn't make sense. MMA is a good opportunity to teach young men discipline and to teach young men how to defend themselves. Right.
It doesn't mean you have to dabble in the alcohol and the women and all these things. You make your own choice as Muslims. And that's why, like, on the Day of Judgment, the shaitan, he will say, I just suggested things to you. You're the one who's going to be held accountable. You know what I mean? So, or you're held accountable for your deen also. Because a lot of people will say, oh, well, if you learn it from a imam or a scholar, then you're not held responsible for it. He's going to be the one who passed the knowledge to you. So I say, well, why follow him in the first place if that's something you're facing? You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? Like, why don't you go explore something and stop telling people not to ask questions? Because when you ask questions, you get to open up that door to receive answers. You know what I mean? The Quran is a perfect example for all you people out there who think like all these things. What does the Quran do? It says it invites people to test it, right? Bring something like this Quran, right? It's saying, come, I invite you, not this, oh, this is the answer and that's it. No, it says, this is the truth. If you don't believe us, bring something. Challenge it, right? Nobody's done it. Just like today. These scholars are doing the same thing. Telling people, no, it's not good to challenge. It's not, you know what I mean? They're actually doing the opposite of what the Quran teaches. The Quran exudes. You know what I mean? So it's really backwards to you know what I mean? Question everything. That's what our God is giving brains for. Yeah, of course. Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. Why else would you have a brain? You know what I mean? With neurons firing through it, right? I mean, think of it this way. A lot of the Quran shows us that we have a lot of science in it too. You know what I mean? It shows us the scientific aspects of our reality, of who we are as human beings, even all the way up to the cosmos. I know in Fusilat it says, I forget what chapter that is in the Quran, but it says there are signs within the horizons and within yourselves. What signs could be within the horizons and also within ourselves? So you look at the constellations, which there is a chapter in the Quran called the constellations, but then you tell people that astrology is not a study, it's haram. Come on, man. Like, doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. You know what I mean?
Yeah, people like it's also like, oh, fortune telling is wrong, but you follow the weather forecast. That's people predicting something and using whether it be astronomy or science or whatever you like to call it to, interpret what the weather looks like. And that's very important, especially if you're a farmer, right? You need to know when it's going to rain possibly and all this, that, and the third. How to get to work, how to prepare for maybe a natural disaster. I think it's very perplexing that they'll be like, oh, that's haram, And also, one of the reasons I kind of don't agree with the Salafis and stuff is I get their passion for the Sahaba, but I don't know if we'll ever be able to be back in be as honorable as the Sahaba. Like, you're asking a lot. The Prophet was actually there. The Prophet, peace be upon him, was actually there. So we live in completely different times like that, right? Than that. And number two, I noticed that a lot of, Salafi brothers go really hard on people they consider innovators, right? Especially people that kind of like use Islam to expound on philosophy, right? There's different, like during the golden age of Islam, there was actually a lot of good Muslim scholars that were inspired by Plato and Aristotle and stuff, and that they use reason and logic to expound on the spiritual aspects of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right. And they go like, oh, well, blah, 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 that's haram and this innovation and stuff. And it reaches to a point where it's just like anti-intellectualism. Right. And don't get me wrong, intellectuals can have, different motives and be, deviants and stuff like that. We all know that. But at the same time, man, the use of the facilities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you is what made me, especially me, as being, a Muslim, because I was always like I don't want to put myself as being a genius or smart, but I was always really intellectual when I was younger. I used to always like using my brain to question things and assert why I think a certain kind of way, why I dress a certain kind of way, why I talk a certain kind of way, and things like that, but to say that that's wrong, I think that's why a lot of people actually get turned to extremism, believe it or not. One of the reasons
because they can't question.
Yeah, because they can't question. So you have some sheikhs saying it's okay to blow yourself up in front of a bunch of kids, even though obviously suicide is haram and killing innocent people is haram. But because the sheikh says it's jihad, you won't question it.
When jihad, what jihad really means is the struggle, your struggle towards your spiritual journey towards Allah. And if somebody comes in the way of that, that's when Allah tells you to go to war. That's when they're taking you from your homes and from your families. That's when you go to war. Like in Palestine, they are allowed jihad because these people are being terrorized. It's not jihad where, just go kill random people in the name of Allah. No, start for Allah. This is not the correct interpretation. You scholars, you know this. You so-called woke Muslims, you know this. But you don't condemn it. Most of you don't. You know what I mean? And it's really sad that you don't. When you do condemn it, it's you don't do anything to stand up against it. You know what I mean?
Right on.
Okay. Yeah. So that's why things like jihad has a negative connotation. I've even seen interviews where people try to explain it on live television, and they do a terrible job of explaining it. You know what I mean? Like, jihad, it just means to struggle towards God. Or, they just don't explain things the right way. We need to have people. We need to have representation. We need to have true authority on things, and not this. Because how can we have true authority on Muslim issues and hadith and sharia and jihad, all these things, when we don't even have a caliphate, when the Muslim world is divided? Where the hell are you getting your sources? Why is it that a Pakistani Muslim might have a different version of Islam when it comes to maybe like an Afghani? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or a black man may study Islam differently than a Saudi. You know what I'm saying? Like, we need to have some sort of structure, and that structure is the Quran. Go from the Quran. Read it word for word. Not some interpretation based on feelings and some philosophical thing, tangent that you go off on. No, what does it say? Allah gave us that word. That was the word. Not what you perceive it to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Hey, shout out to Nicer. I'm actually super surprised that you've been, watching this pretty much the entire thing. I think it's because they just say dua. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hey,
Mashallah.
yeah, Nor Business. If you want to jump on, by all means, I put the link in the chat. But yeah, that's definitely true. I'm telling you, like I mentioned that before with the Uyghur. Oh, the Uyghurs are being oppressed. There's obvious genocide in China, but you're not doing anything about it because the the CCP is in your pockets. You know what I'm saying? I actually went toe to toe with this brother from Pakistan about that. He was like, "Oh, it's the media. It's a lie. The Western lie and stuff like that." And I'm like, "Bro, the Chinese government in general is a state atheist government, so they actually are against religion, point blank, period. Right? So that's a part of their agenda of communism is that you're supposed to worship the state, right?
Yes.
So we already know that, and yet you defend them, but you won't, even like possibly entertain the thought that your brothers are being oppressed. But yeah, when America does something, you know what I'm saying? It's justified, like it's stupid,
It's ridiculous, man. And I had to I got in an argument with my ex about this one time. We had to talk about, as she said, I was going to extremes in my deen. And I have a lot of people tell me I'm going to extremes in my deen. I'm not. I analyze things for what they are. And when I see that our Muslim brothers and sisters, I was in the military, you know what I'm saying? When our Muslim brothers and sisters are being bombed for no reason, and then we have people over here who want to stand up and say something about it, and then you tell them they're going into extremes.
Yeah,
that's bullshit.
Yeah.
So go ahead and keep paying your taxes that's funding these fucking programs to go kill other people overseas for some goddamn resources, like we talked about last time, for some resources that we use for our everyday products. Like, for example, oil.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
Cell phones.
Yeah. The crystals in them that create the weaponry for some of those jets are actually the same crystals in your cell phones.
Yep.
That project the light to project your screen.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So it's like, no, I'm not saying cell phones are haram. What I'm saying is, it's what you use it for. You know what I mean? So don't twist that either, because a lot of people, they'll do that. They'll come on and put words in your mouth. You know what I mean? So I just have to make that as a disclaimer. But at the same time, yeah, we have to really look at these things and what's really. See, I speak the truth, man, and I don't hold back, bro.
Yeah, he does. Because sometimes we butt heads on that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, because it's important that we get these things out there. If we don't, you're never gonna know, and you're gonna be following the shaitan at the end of the day.
Yeah,
you are. And that's why Prophet Sallallahu told us that on the day of judgment, what's Allah going to tell Adam? To take 999 out of every 1,000 beings of his children for the hellfire. And it's because we just follow, just to follow. We don't actually use our own discernment.
Yeah. And Nor Business said, Islam equals peace is extreme. And you know what? I had the sheikh that gave me my shahada. He actually went in on that because there was a lot of actually even Muslims that were like, oh, Islam equals peace. No, that was something that was done reactionary in a post 9/11 world because, the spotlight was on Islam and people were like, oh, all they want to do is do jihad and they're violent and this, that, and the third. No, it actually, I've even had Christians, when I go to comment section in Muslim channels, like they use the fact that jihad is even a thing or a concept as being like, why would you be part of that religion? It's a war. War is considered, not something that's inherently wrong. No, war is considered something wrong, but it's justified. If you are fighting against people that want to wipe you out, you have all the means of disposal to defend yourself.
Hell yeah!
And it's not that
come in my house, man, trying to hurt me and my family and my child. It's you and me, bro. And I know at the end of the day, I'm gonna be able to sleep good at night.
Yeah.
So you're going down.
Especially black people, we really fell for that whole Christian Martin Luther King turn the other cheek BS, man.
Bullshit.
For 400 years, we kissed the white man's ass.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And we turned the other cheek and stuff like that. And where did it get us? Not nowhere.
Still doing the same tactics like protesting. It's not doing shit.
And that's why I really like Africans and Haitians and stuff, because they were like, oh yeah, they got on Kanye West about saying slavery is a choice. He's like, a lot of people are like, hey, I'd rather be dead than be a slave.
Yeah.
So they rose up and they kicked ass.
Bro.
You know what I'm saying?
Haitian rebellion, bro. That's probably one of the God, dude. And then, like, for example, I actually heard that Martin Luther King, before he passed away, he said something along the lines of,
he was leading his people astray.
Yeah, he said he was leading. He said he thinks he may have led his people astray. So all you people who still, follow these so-called holidays, which really are just a mockery. That we get one month out of the entire year.
The shortest month of the year too.
You know what I mean? To celebrate, Black history. All of this world is Black history. The
Yes.
reason they've created these systems and put these principalities in place is because of Black people. Because they keep us at the bottom. Because if they allowed us to raise up in any way, it's over for them. They're already dying out. And this is, like I said, this isn't a racist thing. This is genetics.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Like it's deep stuff.
Yeah. Hey, Nor Business. Hey, fully respect you. Thanks for showing up. Alhamdulillah from the UK. I got a lot of people from the UK showing me love, man. And it's great. Yeah, you gotta wait for Fajr. You got kids sleeping. You know what I'm saying? Do what you need to do. Shout out to you, because I know like Fajr, man, is a battle for a lot of people, man. I think Fajr now is like close to 5 a.m. And I tell you what, man, I'm gonna admit it's a struggle for me, man. You know what I'm saying? Like during Ramadan, you're super amped and you're doing, praying, at appropriate times, and even waking up for Fajr. I have to say this, man. I pray Fajr more on my days off than when I work, because on my days off, I can go back to bed. But like for Fajr, like if I'm up, I'm just up for the rest of the night. Like I go to work at 7 something. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, what's the point of going back to bed for like, half an hour or 45 minutes before I have to get up and head to work, So shout out to you. Thank you so much for being this channel. I think you're new. I've never seen you before. Please keep coming in, inshallah. Please.
Inshallah.
Yeah. So we're almost up to an hour. Any closing statements?
Yeah. I just want to quote Socrates. He said, "The more I come to know, the more I realize I don't know." And knowledge isn't supposed to build an ego. It's supposed to actually humble you. And the more humble you see someone, you should probably sit down with that individual. You know what I mean? Because they probably have something that you haven't perceived. Because I see knowledge as, I don't ever think there's somebody that's smarter than someone. I always see it as a reminder, because all knowledge is something that we've lost, because our ancient ancestors had it. They had it all in terms of this dunya.
Yeah.
And they fell. And that's what Allah reminds us over and over and over, especially in Baqarah with the children of Israel, because we were the true ones. We were the first the black man was first. Even Adam is described as, in Arabic, meaning dark. You know what I mean? So we were the first man. So when Allah describes, that tells us these stories of Adam, right? Realize that he knew everything, and his fall from the garden was because he grew a little bit of an ego. You know what I mean? Yeah. And he didn't allow himself to become humbled by what he had experienced. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I just want to say that, just at the end of the day, we have to remind people there's no such thing as being smarter than another person. We just have to remind them, because there's nothing new under the sun, Because that's what I'm saying, as above, so below. What's in the cosmos is within yourself, just like Allah tells us. So you can see that the sun is on a cycle in the earth, right? On the earth, right? Then you look inside yourself and you study yourself, and you get down to the atoms, and you realize these atoms have neutrinos, right? A neutrino is like a neutron star. It's the same thing, just on a cellular level. So I just reminded you of something. It wasn't that I knew that more than you already knew that. I'm just reminding you that it's happening within you. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's just an example. So I just want to say, knowledge is a reminder and not a way to boost your ego. You know what I mean? So, and humble yourself. The more knowledge you gain, just humble yourself. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, right on. I can't think of adding anything else. I mean, hit it right on the head. This is a great discussion. Hopefully next time you guys see our stream, regardless if you're in the UK, you can engage in this conversation. So actually, I know there's a big time zone difference. So if you go to my channel, you're going to go into the About section. My email is in the About section, right? So by all means, send me an email, inshallah, and then I can maybe schedule something really late, to where it's late over here, but during your time zone, we can link up and stuff like that. And I think it's this is a great conversation that we can expound on, but we don't want to be up here on a soapbox preaching. I want to engage with y'all, man. You know what I'm saying? Especially those the Ummah, or maybe if you're just curious about Islam in general and you just got some questions, by all means talk, because I talk about other subjects besides Islam, as if you've seen my previous videos talking about relationship, more red pill stuff as well. And that's all I have. Our thoughts, man, and our duas go out to our brothers and sisters around the world that are oppressed, that are suffering, all over the world, whether it be Palestine, in China, Myanmar, which, in Burma, there's, actual genocide going on there too. Hearts go out to you so much, and, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you Jannah as a result for your struggles. And they got one more comment from Nicer. I read that Einstein turned from society and spoke only at HBCUs because he's seen how bogus American society is. It is bogus, but hey, I actually, there's actually I used to respect Einstein, but if you look at Einstein, he's kind of a problematic guy, especially the theory of relativity. There's a really good Muslim YouTuber known as Barake. He's been on my channel before, and he talked about how there's a cult of personality around Einstein to make him the super genius when a lot of his accomplishments were overblown, and he actually stole a lot of work. Yeah. So just like Thomas Edison, right?
A lot of it from Nikola Tesla.
Yeah. So Thomas Edison, for instance, is hailed as a scientific genius, scientific hero. He stole a lot of stuff. He sabotaged other people's work. He only cared about money. He didn't care about scientific progress and stuff. So think about that as well, guys.
And Benjamin Franklin didn't invent the light bulb. It was actually, I think it was a black person.
Yeah, I can see that.
I got it. Don't quote me, but I think it was a black person or a black Muslim. I want to see first. But yeah, he didn't invent the light bulb. Just want to let you guys know.
Yes. So we'll see you on the next one. Hopefully to do one tomorrow, inshallah. You know what I'm saying? Around the same time or maybe even later, so we can catch some of you guys across the pond. Thank you so much for chiming in and supporting this channel. Please like, share, and subscribe. I want to get more people involved in this conversation because, I think our Ummah is really beautiful, and I want to know everything about you guys,
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'll catch you on next one.
Peace and love to you guys. Just wanted to say, shout out for my channel. I'm the chosen one, the guided one, the chosen one. And my Instagram is the man with the picture of water. I have a lot of unorthodox attempts at providing knowledge. A lot of it's controversial, but if you're not offended by words and you're more geared on what the context of those words are providing, then go check out my channel. A lot of it's my personal stuff too, but definitely go check out my channel. It's the man _ with the picture, like I can pour picture of water. The man _ with the picture _ of water. I'll probably write it in the comments for you guys so that you can have it. But I just want to say peace and love. Sorry, brother. Give me a second.
There you go. Go ahead. There you go. Perfect. All right,
peace and love.
Yeah, catch you on the next one.
Assalamu alaikum.